This is Kate Barford in Melbourne, Australia with my 18-year-old Arabian Danny Boy. Danny Boy was just started in the bridle at Will's clinic a month and a half ago, so he's fairly new to all of this work. Before that, I was trying to do as much of it as possible working in a rope halter, and really the only success that we were having was in lunging. So he's had a few extra months of work on the lunge line. If you're using a rope halter, I'd suggest at the very least moving to a bitless bridle for this work. But if you haven't tried a bit, I'd suggest trying it and letting your horse tell you how they feel about it. Danny was a lot less frustrated when we started using the bridle because the communication was so much clearer. Okay, so here I'm doing some in-hand work with him. He's fairly inconsistent at first, and he's distracted by a horse running around in the yard behind him. But eventually I get him more focused and working over his back. In the in-hand, you're riding from the ground. You want to have both hands facing with your palms up. Try to maintain good posture as you do this work. My posture could certainly use improvement in this session. You want to hold the whip in the same hand as the outside rein, and you want to hold the bottom rather than the top of the handle so that the whip stays more balanced in your hand. And you want to try to keep consistent contact with the horse's mouth. And by contact, I just mean keeping the slack out of the reins by following the feel of the horse's mouth. In all of the work that we do in Art2Ride, the goal is to get the horse working over their back, or in other words, engaging over their whole top line. In this work in hand, I'm asking him with my whip to take a deep step with his inside hind leg under his body. You can watch either how far the hind legs come under the belly, or you can watch how large the triangle is that's formed between the two hind legs as he takes a step from behind to see how deep his step is. When he steps deep under his body with his hind leg, that pushes up his back and engages his core, and his neck will naturally be pushed forward and downward. When the horse lifts his back in this way, he's working the top line muscles that we need to be strong in order for us to be able to ride. And also, engaging his core will stabilize his balance and help absorb some of the concussion from movement, making him more sound and balanced. When this happens, it feels like the horse's whole body is working together and like he has bigger and freer movement. Danny, this horse, is a rehab case who was really hollow in the back and distended in the tummy when I got him, and was pulling himself along with his shoulders. So the underside of his neck was his strongest muscle rather than his top line. And all the concussion that was going down his front legs had caused lameness in both front legs and splints under both of his front knees. Through proper shoeing and saddling and through this classical foundation training, he's become much sounder, as you can see here. So what I'm watching for is moments where he becomes a bit more consistent, so that his whole top line is engaged and he can just take a big free step like there. That's looking pretty nice. You can see he's stepping a bit deeper under himself with his hind legs, and then he comes back up again. And I just try to maintain a steady feel on his mouth. He tries to stop there, and I just tap him with the whip and say, let's keep going forward. So I'm asking him with the whip to take a deep step under his body with his inside hind leg, and I might ask him for a little bit of a lateral movement, a little bit of a leg yield, just widening the circle, maybe even a little bit of shoulder fore, and that's all just to help him get his hind leg reaching deeper and more under the body so that he'll get in a position where he's working his back and his top line and engaging his core a bit better. And you might notice if he starts pushing into me with the front shoulder, which he doesn't do too much on this side, he tends to do it more on the other side, I might use a little bit of indirect rein to ask him to step that shoulder out of my space if necessary. So there he goes into a nice stretch. He looks a bit looser. He's stepping deeper under his body and he's staying fairly consistent. And I obviously liked that because I rewarded it. I stopped and I went to the other side. And you can see here when I start, I just tapped him with the whip until he took a step with his inside hind leg forward, and then I stopped tapping and I just let him go forward so that he knows that that whip is communicating with his inside hind leg. So I'm using a little bit of indirect rein here because this is his stiffer side. Most horses tend to be a bit stiffer on the right side, and I just want to get him out of my space a bit. He's pushing me a bit with that shoulder, and it only takes a little bit before he decides to stop doing that. And of course, I just also tap him with the whip and ask him to make the circle a bit bigger, step away from me. There he's taking nice big steps under his body and lifting his back, and he starts to get a bit more consistent here, which I like. And you can see that when he gets more consistent, I change the angle of my inside rein. So at first I might have it a little bit wide if I need to help me maintain the contact. But once he gets into a nice stretch, I want to try and mimic the angle of the reins when I'm riding so that he just stretches right down into the contact like he would do if I was riding. So now we're starting to see, even there you can see he's lifting his tail because his whole top line is engaged from the front of his neck all the way to the back of his tail there. And he comes back up again here. He's a little bit overbent. I just put him into a bit of a leg yield. And he comes right back into the stretch. The hardest part of this work is maintaining a steady contact with your outside rein, and I'm constantly sliding that outside rein back towards his withers to help me maintain that contact. And when he goes into the stretch, the rein's going to want to slide down towards his ears, and I just slide it back up towards his withers like I did just there. You can see when his head comes up how his hind legs don't come through as far. And when he goes into the stretch, how much deeper his step gets and how it pushes up and engages his tummy. I'm still looking for him to just sort of lock in and start taking nice big free steps. That's pretty nice there. And I obviously thought so once again because I stopped. Okay, here we're moving to the lunge work. And I'm starting in a bit of a modified in hand. So I'm just wanting him to know once again that my lunge whip is communicating with his inside hind leg, asking it to step under the body, reach forward. So I'm just starting I'm starting close to him. And once he gets into the stretch, I'm gonna let him out a bit on the line. That's a bit slow. I need to get him moving forward a bit more. This was an interesting session because he kept wanting to break into the trot, which isn't typical of him, but you know, you work with the horse that you have on the day, and whatever gait he wants to go in, I just try to ask him to give me quality of that gait. So that's a nice walk there. You can see he just frees up, he's stepping deep. Working over his back. And whenever his hind end starts to point at me, I just use my whip to ask him to step that inside hind leg under himself and away from me. I'd rather him travel in a little bit more of a shoulder in position than a haunches in position. Like I did just there, I just asked him to step that hind end away from me. And I can use my whip either towards his belly, which I'll do if I want to ask him to make the circle a bit bigger, to step away from me into a bit of a lateral movement, or if I just want to get those haunches away from me, I can tap him on the hip with the whip. And of course I can use the whip to ask him to go forward as well. Now here he breaks into a trot. I didn't ask for that trot, but instead of asking him to come back to the walk, I'm just going to ask him to engage himself in the trot and use himself properly, lift his back, and come into a nice stretch. And it's really obvious with this horse in the trot that when he brings his head up, his hind legs get left behind. Like there. I mean, you can, and then he comes down into the stretch and he takes a deeper step, even if it's only for a moment. That's a bit better. He gets a bit spooked by something there. And he comes back down into the walk. And usually he has an improved walk after a trot. So just like in the in hand, I'm keeping the slack out of the line, of the lunge line. And I can either do that, sometimes you'll actually see me lift my hand up a bit when he lifts his head up to try to maintain that contact. Other times I'll use my whip hand to help me slide my other hand up the line. And also, if the line gets loose, I might ask him to step away from me so that he actually steps out into the contact and makes that, and takes the slack out of that rein himself. Again, he broke into that trot there. I wasn't asking for that trot, but he gets quite a nice few steps of walk afterwards. And really at this stage of this horse's development, I'm just trying to get him really consistent in the walk and using the lateral movements and using the trot to help me with that. You can see he's really going somewhere with this walk. It's a nice rhythm. It looks like something you'd want to ride when they get in that sort of forward position. Okay, so I'm pretty sure he broke into that trot again. And I'm just asking him to keep his hind end pointed away from me. And I'm following his mouth with my hand. There, I'm lifting up my hand to maintain the contact, and then he comes back down. And I'm using my whip to ask him to step away. And it's really nice, like there, when you can see the top line muscles of their neck actually light up and engage, especially with this horse who had all of his muscle on the bottom of his neck and was just pulling himself along with his shoulders. It's nice to see that underside of that neck get really nice and relaxed, and that top side of his neck, just all of those muscles light up. And you can see when he gets into a nice deep stretch, his tail lifts as well. And that time I asked for the trot. And I don't expect the transitions to be good at all at this stage. I just let him find his balance. Keep asking him to step his hind end away from me because he's really wanting to travel in sort of a haunches in position here. And it's just taking him a bit to find his balance here. He's going a bit fast. And there he's starting to lock in a bit. And he's slowing down the trot. And that's quite nice there. And I just asked for a little bit more. There we go. You can see that the triangle that's being formed by those hind legs gets a bit bigger, which means he's reaching under his body more, but he's not going any faster. So he's maintaining the rhythm and just reaching a bit deeper, which is what we want. We want the slowest, deepest step we can get. And out of that trot, he comes into a nice walk here. So I just try to stay at the top of the triangle between that's formed by my whip and the line when I'm lunging. Okay, so I was happy with that, so I rewarded him by changing sides. Once again, I'm starting with a bit of modified in hand, and he was a little bit overreactive to the whip for a second, but then he realized, oh, okay, it's just the lunge whip, not gonna hurt me. asking him for the exact same thing I ask for in hand, to step under himself with his inside hind leg, step away from me, and get working over his back. And as that impulsion comes forward, I'm just following it in with my hand, with the contact. And as he gets into a nice stretch, I let him out on the line a bit more. So I could be doing a little bit of a better job maintaining the contact here. The right side is his stiffer side, and I always like to start him on the left because he opens up a bit on his good side, and then by the time we get to his bad side, he's more warmed up. If I start him on the right side, he tends to just be really stiff, and it takes us a long time to get anywhere. So he's starting off a bit slow in the walk. On this side. And I could be a little bit more assertive with asking him to get a bit more pace here. But he's finding the stretch. There I ask him for that trot because I think I started to realize, okay, this walk isn't going anywhere. So let's get up a little bit of energy. Let's get into a little bit of a trot here. I'm just using the trot really to help me with my walk. Of course, I'm going to keep going in the trot until I get something nice. Again, wanting to travel in a little bit of a haunches in, so I'm just asking him to step that inside hind under himself. And I'm just trying to maintain contact, which is always harder in the trot because you've got the up-down movement as well as the forward movement. There we go. Now he's starting to give me a nicer trot. I let him come back to the walk. And again, that trot work, we didn't accomplish too much there, except we've got a much nicer walk now. We've got this walk is going somewhere. So over the next few months, I'd like to see this horse just get more consistent. He's still coming up and down a lot, in and out of the stretch. And it's really obvious that he needs to be in a deep stretch in order to get working over his back, because whenever he brings his head up, his hind legs fall out behind him and he hollows his back. So he needs to be in that forward downward position to really get working over his back the way he needs to be. So I ask him for another trot, and this is nicer. than the first trot we got on this side. This is actually, he's actually working over his back better this time, being more consistent, stepping deeper under the body, and it's a nice rhythm and pace as well. So I let him come back to the walk here. And you can see he gets really nice and loose there. Okay, that was the end of the lunge work, and now we're moving into the ridden work. So for the first part of the ride, I just want to mimic the in-hand work. So I'm just going to put him on a circle. All I care about is that he gets working over his back and that he gets into a nice stretch. And of course, that's harder for him with me on his back. That's why we do the in-hand and the lunge work first. If you've got a horse that really has no top line and you just want to develop him, I would just keep him in the in-hand and the lunge work until you've got enough of a top line to where he can actually carry you, which this horse does. He can carry me fine. So I've got the first few minutes of the ride here for you, so you can see where we start out, and then I'll skip more towards the end of the ride, the last 10 minutes of the ride or so that you can see where we get to. So already he's starting to think about coming into the stretch. He's not getting all the way down, and you can see I have to use quite a bit of inside rein, in just quite a bit of direct rein to get him around the turns. And that's because when a horse isn't working over their back, they can't really bend. So as he gets over his back more throughout the session, I have to use the inside rein less, and I can just ask him to step over a bit more through the turns. So I'm keeping my hands wide when I need to maintain contact. And I apologize, there is quite a bit of blurry video in the first part of this. So I'm just trying to maintain contact, and also, so following him with my hands, but also following him a bit with my legs. So as he swings his hind leg in, I encourage that with my calf to help, to just say, just like I would with my whip in hand, to just say, okay, take a deeper step with that leg on both sides. I'm using my legs alternately to ask him for a bigger walk. And also, if you want to ask the horse to step over, you want to also try to time that with when he's swinging that inside hind leg in. And I'm riding in the shape of the bend, so my outside leg is back a bit from the hip, so that I'm opening that door for him to step into if I'm asking him for a lateral movement. That's starting to be a nicer walk there. Okay, so this is skipping to the last 10 minutes of the ride. It was about a 25-minute ride altogether. And I've got him in a little bit of a trot. Now, I've done very little trot work under saddle with this horse. We had a lot of saddle fitting issues. I've only just gotten the saddle to a point where he can trot in it. So we've only had a few trot work sessions. So really, I'm just using the trot here to help me get a nicer walk, which it does. He's really engaging his top line there, taking a nice big deep step, carrying me somewhere. And when he gets over his back, you can actually see a bit more movement in my pelvis. So I'm not trying to mechanically move my pelvis forward and backwards. It's just that when he lifts his back up, it's like Will says, it's like a wave carrying you forward. So your hips just get a bit more movement in them. He just had a little bit of a distracted moment there and fell out behind. So I asked him for another little trot here. And it's just taking him a moment to find his balance. There he gets into a bit of a stretch, and you can see when he does get into this stretch how much deeper he can step through behind. And really, I should have my stirrups a bit shorter to be getting off his back a bit more at this stage. So after this, I've got just a couple minutes at the end here of the next session I did with him, just to show you a bit more trot work, where I did put my stirrups up. And again, after that trot, we get a pretty nice walk. He's stretching all the way down. You can see his top line muscles in his neck engaging and the bottom of his neck staying nice and soft. And there, that's really nice. And there he just says, "Do you think the session could end now?" And he just makes that suggestion, and I just say, "No, let's keep going a little bit longer." But I keep that in mind if he's trying to let me know he's tired. So I won't ride him too much longer. You can see now I'm not having to have to use so much direct rein because he's over his back more, so he can bend on the circle a little bit more, and he's getting off my inside leg a bit better. I ask for a little more trot here, and this is better. We're getting a stretch there. That's nice. He's coming through with his hind end a little bit more. Still not as much as I'd like. But he has a few nice moments in that trot. I was really happy with this ride overall, with how consistent he did get in the walk. And I could really feel him working over his back and lifting me up by the end of the session. There, I'm doing a bit of a better job keeping my shoulder blades back as well, so that's something that I tend to only think about when things are going well. So, there's a lot of things to think about while you're riding, so I need to do that a bit more consistently in myself, just keep my shoulders back. And I ask him for another little trot here. Now we're getting somewhere. Even that transition was better. So I don't ask for very much of that. I'm happy with it, so I let him come back to the walk. And I ask for a little bit of a leg yield over to the fence. A little bit of shoulder four here. I haven't done too much of that with him. So at this stage, I'm not very organized about my lateral movements. I'm just using them as I feel I need to keep him over his back. A little leg yield here, the other direction. And right here you can see, well, you can't see, it gets a bit blurry, but I felt that he was really getting over his back and lifting me up. And just like on the in the in-hand work, sometimes I have to use a little bit of indirect terrain to get him to not push with that shoulder, but I try not to use too much of it. So yeah, so this is actually where I meant to say I felt he's really carrying me really nicely here. He's really getting over his back. You can actually see I look taller in the saddle, and that's where I end the ride. And then this is the next session that I had with him. It's just a few minutes of this here. I just wanted to show you a little bit more trot work because I've put my stirrups up here so I can get off his back a bit better, and I just wanted to see if I asked him to go a little bit longer in the trot, what could I get out of him? And you can see already he's more consistent than in the previous session. I'm getting off his back better. his hind end is coming through more. It's nowhere near as good as I'd like it to be, but this is early days of this work with him. And he gets into a nice rhythm there, so I think, okay, well, I'll try to change reins. I haven't ever asked him to maintain the trot and change reins since I started doing this work with him, so I have no expectation here that that will be any good. And I just put him back on the circle here and see what I can get on this rein. And there you can see the rhythm start to slow down and him start to bring his hind end under him more. And he finds the stretch there, and that was nice. I asked for a little bit more, and then I let him come down to the walk. So again, this is an 18-year-old horse who had a lot of lameness issues. So I hope that, you know, people with older horses like mine will see this and get some hope from this. Getting your horse working over his back can really fix a lot of those bridle lameness issues. Of course, you know, alongside good saddle fitting and good farriery and body work. A little bit of a leg yield there. And again, you can see how I'm giving the rein when I'm asking for the trot. I'm not holding him in any sort of frame. And this is much nicer. He's found the stretch almost straight away. He's still coming up and down. I let him come back to a walk for a second. Find his balance again. And then I ask again. And that's a nice pace for him. He's getting a little bit more consistent, still bringing his head up and down. And then we end the ride there. Thank you.